Hello and welcome back to the OTB channel. Here's a question for you. Are you a tiler or a floater? In window manager terms, I mean. Well, I'm a floater. I've not really used tiling window managers for more than a day or two, and I remain to be convinced. But I'm prepared to be persuaded, so I've taken a look at i3. Let's get to the intro and I'll show you what I found. Right, so welcome back, and as my mug says, don't panic, we're looking at tiling window managers. So let me just have a glug and then we'll make a start. All my life I've used floating window managers, from back in the day when I used Windows all the time, through to using GNOME, KDE, Mate, and now OpenBox. And I'm comfortable using the mouse, I'm comfortable with the way it works, and I saw no real reason to change. We tend to be quite stubborn up here in the north of England. There's an expression that's used, often associated with Yorkshiremen, although I'm in Lancashire, which is, we know what we like and we like what we know. What that actually means is, don't be telling us what to do. We figured it out for ourselves and we're going to stick with that. Thank you very much. And we can be a little bit stubborn. However, recently, as you know, I was persuaded to look at something a little bit different. And I looked at OpenBox, which, by the way, let's just quickly switch to that. I am still using, and I don't think I'm going to go back to Mate. I think I'm going to stick with OpenBox. It's been brilliant. Does everything I need it to do. But am I prepared to make the leap to a tiling window manager? Well, because I've made the move to a window manager only rather than another desktop environment, I'm feeling quite experimental. And I've been watching DT for quite a while now, and the basic tiling window manager, well, I say basic, they're not that basic, but the tiling window manager seems to be gaining in popularity. He's obviously an advocate of them, and the other week when I did OpenBox, I had a few comments that said, come on, it's never too late to go tiling. And I do seem to get quite a few requests to have a look at tiling window managers in the comments on my videos. So I thought, well, okay, why not? I've got a little bit of resistance here because moving from a floating window manager to a tiling window manager means that you stop being mouse-centric and you become keyboard-centric. I'm a dreadful typist. I did try i3 about 1.5 to 2 years ago, just for a day or so on a laptop, and I found myself getting twisted up trying to find the right keyboard bindings. I'm not a great typist, so I don't know how much of a problem that's going to be. I do know that tiling window managers have great multi-monitor support, which is brilliant. They do tend to be associated a little bit with the Uber geek. I'm looking at you, Derek from DistroTube. Sorry, mate. And what do they have to offer that broadly is so much better? Are they lightweight? Well, yes, because they're just a window manager. But the way of working by just using your keyboard and moving between workspaces rather than just minimizing and maximizing windows, which isn't something I tend to have done, is going to be a paradigm shift. It's not just a different looking desktop I'm going to have. It's a different looking desktop that's going to require a completely different method of use, which might not be that comfortable initially to become familiar with. But okay. So I thought, right, let's install a few. And I used Arch. I used Arch because that's the system I've got that I play with. But you could install these window managers on whatever your distro is. And I installed i3, Awesome, Xmonad, and Qtile. i3 and Awesome were relatively easy to set up, even though Awesome is written in Lua. I think that's the programming language. But the configuration file, you can make sense of it fairly straightforwardly. It's not an issue. Not so with Qtile, which is written in Python, and Xmonad, which I think is written in Haskell. Haskell, yeah, that's it. I've got no programming expertise whatsoever, but I can normally find my way through a script or a config file and figure out what's going on. But with Qtile and with Xmonad, I struggled a little bit, and so I went and stole configs from other people, including Arco Linux configs and DT's configs, which got me up and running on Qtile and Xmonad. Where I messed up, though, I'm going to have to do more work on this, is although their configs got me up and running, I wanted to make changes. And they were simple changes, like I didn't like the power line graphics on the bar, and I wanted it to show different things, and I just wanted things like Network Manager to appear on my primary screen and not my secondary screen. And I kept breaking the configs. So they're works in progress. But Awesome and i3, I got an okay with. I say okay, it's all relative. I found both to be quite uncomfortable to start off with. But I have found over the week as I've been playing with them that I'm starting to get there. Another disadvantage, though, I have a terrible memory. I'm playing with i3 with this cheat sheet in front of me of what the key bindings are, because I think it's going to take quite a while to get the key bindings embedded in my head so that I'm not having to think about what I'm doing. But that's by the by, that's just a matter of time. One of the big problems, though, that I found was I was struggling with XR&R commands. Now, you saw me in OpenBox a couple of weeks ago figure out how to do this by setting up AR&R and basically saving a config file and having that start up. I found that in the tiling window managers, that didn't go quite as smoothly as it did with OpenBox. It seemed to me that putting the XR&R command in a startup file, it was running that command at some point after the window manager had started, and it was messing up the display. It really was. And even doing a restart wasn't sorting it out properly. And I thought what actually needs to happen here is XR&R needs to run before I even try and start the window manager. And this was causing me hassles. It's always the little things. I have found a solution, though, and it's not to get rid of LightDM and start using StartX and putting it in my StartX configuration files. It's using LightDM. So let me show you what I did. So here's the trick to get your XR&R command, setup, configuration, whatever you call it, running after your X session has started, but before your actual i3 session starts, or in fact your Awesome, your Xmonad, your Qtile session starts. And the magic is all about using a small entry in your etc lightdm.conf. Now you'll see this here. I have got my etc lightdm.conf file open. If you move down to the seat section, you'll see there's an entry here called display setup script. I think it's actually here as well, just automatic, and yeah, there it is. There's an entry there that is already commented out, but I've just added it in again. Display setup script equals USR share lightdm xr&r dot sh. So I'm pointing lightdm to a particular script in USR share, and I've called it lightdm xr&r. Right, let's go to that script and see what it is. It's this. It's actually the script that I generated automatically in AR&R when I was playing about with AR&R on OpenBox the other week, and I saved it into my local bin directory. Well, what I've done this time is I've just moved that script over to the USR share directory and renamed it. And what happens now is, as soon as I log into LightDM, before the specific X session that I want starts, XR&R does its stuff. And I've tested this with lots of different things, the different tiling window managers, my OpenBox setup, all sorts of things. And I'm finding that my graphic displays are set up automatically. My large screen is on the right, my small screen is on the left, the primary for the large screen is set, and everything in the world is good. So that was a bit of a eureka moment for me. The problems that seem just massive that you can't get to the bottom of, when you find the solution, they're just straightforward and easy. So after that, it was just a case of playing around with it, and to keep things manageable, I thought, which one should I go with first? And I decided on i3 because the configuration file in i3 is probably the easiest one to get to grips with, and it's a relatively simple window manager to install and set up its basic configuration. So I'm going to start off by showing you how I installed it in a virtual machine, then we'll switch back to my main desktop and I'll show you what I've done. First things first then, how do you go about installing i3? Well, it's not about the distro that you run, and it's not about a desktop environment, it's just a window manager, so it's fairly lightweight. I installed it on my Arch system simply because Arch is the cutting edge system that I use for playing with, and I will experiment with Arch, and I've done all sorts to it over the last year, but for those who say it's unstable, it's never broken on me at all, and I use Debian Stable for my production work. However, Arch is pretty good as far as packages are concerned, because you also have access to the AUR, which can be quite handy if you're playing with relatively obscure window managers, which i3 isn't anymore. What I'm using here to show you is the virtual machine that I've already got set up in VirtualBox, which is my Endeavour. This is Endeavour OpenBox. It was the one that I went through a few weeks ago. But installing i3 is fairly simple. It's simply about issuing the command, certainly within Arch, sudo pacman -s i3. I believe i3 is a moniker for, or telling the operating system to install a number of packages. And it's given us some options there: i3 gaps, i3 WM, i3 blocks, i3 lock, and something called i3 status, which we could install individually, but by asking Pacman to install just i3, it will tend to go for all. I believe i3 Window Manager and i3 gaps actually conflict with each other, so I'm going to select all here, but it will be i3 gaps that is actually installed by default. Basically the same, but you can have gaps between windows, so from what I can see, there's not huge differences. Let's just enter the selection of all, And what's it decided to install? Confuse, whatever that is, LBRY, a cursor thing, YAJ, L, i3 gaps, i3 blocks, i3 lock, and i3 status. Yeah. So it's gone for i3 gaps rather than i3 window manager. So let's just hit yes and install and see what happens. So that's it now installed. Let me make this terminal a bit bigger and clear it to start off with. What I want to see straight away is whether or not the installation of i3 has created any configuration files. Because what you ultimately want is an i3 directory in your .config directory. I suspect it doesn't actually create this until you first launch i3, but let's have a look. Let me just enlarge the text on the terminal and do a list in the .config directory. Have we got an i3 entry there? No, we haven't. Have we got an i3 status entry there? No, we haven't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out of this now, back into LightDM, and we will then log into i3 and see what happens from there. Well, the first thing we get is this little text box that pops up that says, you've not configured i3 yet. Do you want me to generate a config at home.otb.config i3 config? In other words, that directory that I looked for a minute ago wasn't there, but it's now giving me the option to create one. So I'm just going to hit enter. Yes, generate the config. It's now saying what do you want to choose as your modifier key. Now, all tiling window managers tend to use one key followed by a whole range of other options to launch windows, to move windows, to resize windows. Some people prefer the Windows key, for want of a better name. Other people prefer the Alt key. I'm going to stick with the Windows key, and throughout the rest of this video, I'm just going to refer to it as a super key. But it's completely up to you. If you want to choose the Alt key, you can do that. So I'm just going to hit enter again. And here we are. We are now at our default configuration. Endeavour obviously has this default wallpaper hard-coded somewhere, because I know on my plain Arch system I've just got a black screen. But you can see already that what I have now is a bar, my i3 bar, down at the bottom of the window, with a range of different things there, my IP address, whether or not I've got a battery, amount of space left on my disk, etc, etc, etc. But where do I go from here? Because if I right click or left click, absolutely nothing happens. And if you're not familiar with the default key bindings before you actually start, you might be wondering what you do next. Luckily, i3 has a really simple key binding to launch a terminal. And that's the super key, in other words, the Windows key, followed by enter. And we open a terminal. Okay, all good. Now, whether or not you want to modify this i3 that it's set up by default into something that looks and feels like your own creation will depend on whether or not you want to get down and dirty with the configuration file. Let me just increase the size of this prompt and go back and look in our config directory now. So cd.config. If I could type, and this is a problem with me and tiling window managers, I'm absolutely useless at typing, and it's not great because you're keyboard driven in one of these default tiling window managers. And you can see there we've got an i3 directory. Okay, let's cd into the i3 directory and see what we've got there. And we've got one file essentially called config. Now the status bar, let me just have a look again in the config directory. Actually, we don't need to put LA. There we go, we're back on config. Let's just have a list and see if there's an i3 status directory created. No, there isn't. Therefore, we're going to create one. So make directory i3 status. At the moment, there's clearly nothing in i3 status. We have just created a blank directory. We can, however, copy the default configuration from i3 status into this folder, and you should do that if you're going to mess with it. Right, so I've just cleared the screen. Let's copy over the i3 status config into the i3 status folder that we've just created, and then you can mess about with your local configuration copy as much as you want. And the way that we do this is simply to issue the copy command, and I believe it's in the etc directory. There we are. Copy etc i3 status.conf into, well, let's go to the conf directory. Config i3 status, and we want to, again, just call that config. Let's now switch back to my install system, and I'll show you some of the things that I've done, and we'll also go through how you actually move around i3. Right, so we're back on my main screen here. What you can see in front of you is my 1080 screen, which is my primary screen. What you can't see is my secondary screen to the left of the primary, which is a 1680 by 1050 screen. The wallpaper I'm showing, just if anybody's interested in it, I pulled it down from DT DistroTube's GitLab page. He has an interesting collection there. It's well worth taking a look. So, what you see, up at the top, you'll see that I've moved my i3 bar to the top of the screen rather than at the bottom, because that's what I prefer. And over on the right, personal preference only, I've got rid of a lot of the little status notifications. I just want something fairly plain that shows me the time and date. And I've also got a couple of icons, Network Manager, and a volume icon. And of course, you've got OBS there in the corner. Over on the left, you can see, I suppose, little tags there called web, file, text, and number 7. They're workspaces. And when you start off with a default configuration, they are just numbered 1 through 9. You can play around, though, and customize that. And that's what I've been doing. What I really like about this, though, is if you have a multi-screen setup, there are 9 workspaces set up by default. You can set as many or as few as you want. When I start up i3 on this system, it allocates workspace 1 to my primary screen, which I've now called web, and workspace 2 to my secondary screen. What that ultimately means is I can use different workspaces for different screens and different workspaces on those screens for different applications. So, just to give you an idea, in order to move to different workspaces here, you can see web is there, and I know that's workspace 1, and I can just click on that, and it'll take me to the web browser, which is on the Arch i3 wiki page. I could also move to my file manager, which is actually workspace 3, but up here it's called file. You see that I use my mouse to click between the workspaces, and you can do that, but I could just hit Super 3 and move straight to my file manager. If I wanted to go to my text page, I would say Super 4, and you can see that I've got Genie there. And if I wanted to go back to the workspace I had open before, that would be Super 7, which has got nothing on it at the moment. So, all good. Currently, I have OBS running on my smaller secondary screen, and if I just click on here, you should see that down in the bottom left corner. I won't leave it there where I'm talking you through this, but that's currently the screen on my left-hand side, so let's just knock that off. Okay, so how does this work? How do we move around i3? Let's start off by hitting Super Enter, which opens a terminal. I've got Terminator set up to open. And let's open up a second terminal. So we have two terminal windows in tiling mode here. This is the default. Now, you'll notice there is a gap between these windows. In the standard i3 window manager, you don't get a gap. You don't have to have a gap in i3 gaps either, but I like just a small gap. A small gap there. I think it just looks, I don't know, it feels a little bit more comfortable to me. So how do you manipulate these different windows? Well, you can see the focused window that I have here is red at the top, which is what Terminator does. I can move to the terminal window on the left by hitting Super and the left key, or Super and the right key to swap back. If I didn't want to do that, I can in fact use I believe they're the Vim keys. I'm just having a look here. Is it J, K, and L? Yeah, so Super J, Super L. No. Oh, Super semicolon. Right, my mistake there. So I don't use Vim. The keys aren't familiar to me. I think I'll probably just hit Super in the left arrow, Super in the right arrow. So all good. This is the default view. If I wanted to move that default view perhaps to a horizontal one, I can go Super E. And if I wanted to move it back, Super E. If I wanted it to stack one on the other, Super S. Or if I didn't want to stack and I wanted to have a tabbed interface, I would do Super W. And you can see that we've got the different tabs up here. I like the fact that I can switch between the mouse, but I don't have to switch between the mouse. I can just use the Super and the arrow keys here. Or if you want to use the Vim key bindings, you can use that. So let me go back to the default view, which would be Super E. And there we go. Now this is in tiling mode. You don't have to keep it in tiling mode. If there's a particular program that you want to float in the traditional sense of floating, it's pretty easy. It's Super Shift Spacebar. And suddenly you have a floating window here. If I wanted to move that window around with my mouse, I hit the Super key and just pick it up and move it around. If I wanted to go back to what it was, I just toggle it by hitting Super Shift Spacebar. So, okay, I've got some control over what I want to do. What about if I wanted to shut that window and just have a single terminal? Well, I close it down by hitting Super Shift Q. And that's it. Let's hit Super Shift Q as well, just to stop that terminal. You can also move windows around. So let me bring in my left-hand screen and let's move over to my left-hand screen, my secondary display, and you can see currently I have got OBS running on it. Now, by default, that is currently set up on something called Term, so not OBS, it bears no relation to it, but you can see the up in the left-hand corner where you might be able to see it, it says Term. What if I wanted to move that to screen 7? Well, I can do that very easily. I do Super Shift and then the number or name, or well, just the number of the workspace I want to move it to. So let's move this from workspace 2 over to workspace 7. And it's as simple as that. Then I focus that, and I want to move it back to workspace 2. And there it is. It's back again. What have I actually done to get mine looking like this? Well, let's go to Genie, my text editor. If we run through this config, you should see here some of the things that I've done. I've got the modifier key set as mod 4, so that's my Windows key. And then I've got a few startup entries here. So you don't need a separate startup file. Everything can go into the main i3 config file. So I'm starting up Compton. I'm then setting my keyboard layout to GB. I'm setting my wallpaper with nitrogen, just as I did when I was setting up OpenBox. I'm adding a volume icon, and you can see all these things have started up here. I've also changed my default font to Deja Vu Sans Mono 10. It was a little bit small on the i3 bar for my liking. What else have I done? I haven't actually touched that much of this, so a lot of this is by default. You can actually alter the volume with keys, but for me it's just easier to have an applet up in my system tray. What else have I done that's separate? Oh, I got it to do gaps between windows. This is i3 gaps, so it will do that, but by default it doesn't. It's just set up as a standard i3. So I went out on the internet and found a piece of code to add, which seems to work well. All the standard bindings are there, but I've added some quick start keys to start Chromium, PCman FM and Genie, just so that I don't have to go looking for them. And I also am running J4 dmenu desktop as well. So a few custom launcher keys there. Have I done anything else? I think everything else is pretty much standard, but I have played around with some of the colours, and I've added in a colour section, and I've also played around a little bit with the bar. So I've asked that it outputs the tray just to DP-1, which is my primary monitor. I've got here strip workspace numbers, yes. I've got some colours there as well. And I've set, where are we, i3 status as the thing up here. You can use a whole range of different alternative programs. i3 Blocks, I think, is one of them. But hey-ho. So I've played around a little bit. I've also played around with my i3 status config and basically butchered it to death so that it shows nothing but the time and date. That was just a personal thing. And it's starting to look as I would hope. Really then, that's as far as I've got with i3 so far. By the way, your default if you want to log out of i3 is Super Shift E. And if you do that, you get this little bar which says, yes, I want to exit, or no, I don't. Can't find a key binding to just do that on the keyboard. I seem to have to press the mouse to do it. That was set up by default simply by installing the i3 package. I wasn't that keen on that, so I used a little bit more code in my i3 config to just bring up a simpler log out, restart, exit menu, which I'm using just hitting Super key and X. And you'll see up here that I now just hit L, R or S for log out, reboot or shut down. Let me just escape from that. So that's my i3 setup so far. Right, so some cold tea left over. Let me just get this finished and take a mouthful. There was no need to panic. So that's been my experience so far with i3. What do I think? Initially, for the first couple of days, I'll be honest, I disliked it. I found it really uncomfortable to use. I appreciated the multi-monitor support. I liked being able to flip over to different workspaces and different screens. I hated being confined almost to a keyboard, partly because of my memory about remembering what the key bindings were, but also I'm used to being driven by the mouse. I go and grab for the mouse at the first opportunity. I have found, however, that as the week has gone on, it's become easier and easier. And I do see the benefits of it. I really do. I'm not yet convinced that it's something that I will want to swap to, but I can see the attraction. And certainly for a multi-screen monitor, it's very efficient. If you're using a laptop, and my little X131E, for instance, has got a terrible touchpad, and if you don't want to use the touchpad, maybe using the keyboard is an easier thing. So there are some advantages. I think it's going to take a little bit more time to convince me, but I've not been put off. That's what I'd say. I've not been put off. So, yeah. As a first dip into a tiling window manager, so far the experience has been okay. It might get better. Over the course of the next few months, I will look at some of the others. I think Awesome will be the next one, which seems to be a mixture of using the mouse and tiling, which personally I might be better with. I don't know. But I do want to look at Xmonad and Qtile as well, and goodness knows what else. I'm not going to have a series where we look at them each week. I'll slot them in as we go. But yeah, so far so good. Nothing that I could see that's going to drag me away to i3. I'm still sunning myself in OpenBox, which continues to impress me, but give it time, you never know. So that's probably it for this week. You can see that we're at balmy 9 degrees centigrade now, so it's T-shirt weather, back to the Northern Soul T-shirt. And 9 degrees Celsius is almost summer in Lancashire. What else? Oh, yeah, I need to tell you. Don't forget, I'm on LBRY as well, so by all means come and join us there. If you want to join the OldTechBloke Facebook group, please go there as well. But for now, thanks very much, people. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I've enjoyed the experimentation, which is what it's all about. And yes, it's been a bit rambly, and I know that some of my viewers, we won't call them trolls out there, wish that I'd turn up the speed by 1.75 or 2. It's never going to happen, guys. If you don't like the ramble, don't watch me. It's just how I talk. But yeah, worth a shot. Worth a shot. So have a great weekend, people, and I'll see you next week. And by the way, I've got a week's holiday coming up in a couple of weeks, so I'm hoping to have a bit of a video fest and put a few more out there. See you next week.